Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Nikon Creators Hour. I am your host, Mike Corrado, and we are here with some great content and interviews with some really epic photographers. I've been with Nikon for 35 years, and I've been taking pictures for over 40, and we have with us this afternoon Idris Solomon. Idris, welcome to the Creators Hour. How are you?
I'm good, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's been a pretty crazy 3 months, and we started off the Creators Hour with really great inspirational content that we wanted to share, so people stayed motivated during these times. And as we're starting to come out of it in different phases, we want people to hit the street running, taking great pictures, and certainly want to talk about your photos, and we thank you for putting them together. I often apologize for asking you to cull down your years and years of work into about 8 or 9 images, so thank you for doing that. That is much appreciated. And for those of you turning in, Idris is a documentary photographer. His work is so powerful and energetic, and the first time I saw your work, I was just blown away. And when we looked at it, through the folks at Nikon, everyone said the same thing. There's just a lot of great energy and passion to your work, and we're glad to have you here today. We were connected through a good friend, Nikon ambassador Corey Rich. Where did you meet Corey?
I actually met Corey at Eddie Adams' workshop, I think 2018. But what's funny is before that, I have a background in graphic design and advertising. I'm an art director by day and a photographer by night. And a few years ago, I think right when Corey might have got his first ambassadorship with Nikon, I was working on that campaign at an agency called McCann Erickson. And I remember seeing Corey Rich, his name on there, and working with his photos at that time. But that was way before I was starting photography. Fast forward when I was working on the yellow team with Corey at Eddie Adams, I told him the story that I was familiar with him before, knowing who he was as a photographer, because I worked on his campaign. So, we just happened to work together on the same team, and we connected that way. So that was sort of like the introduction to us working together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, he is one great person, and like you, he's into filmmaking, and I know you do video as well. And we'll talk a little bit about you before we get started. So I always like to take it back to that first moment when you picked up a camera. And, you said you start with the art background and design. Ironically, that's where I was. I went for a Bachelor of Design Graphics, Bachelor of Fine Arts and Design Graphics in college. So we kind of come from that same space, and photography became part of my world because of my dad in his darkroom in the basement and working together with him. Talk a little bit about your first experiences with cameras, and then kind of take us on that journey of how you then became a professional in this business as a photographer and filmmaker.
Yeah, so I didn't go to school for photography. I went to school for graphic design. I went to did my undergrad school at Binghamton University, upstate New York. And when I was accepted there, I didn't realize they didn't have a graphic design program. So I'm flipping through the course book, and I'm not seeing anything that registered with me. I saw computer science, and I said, okay, it has the word computer in it. I knew I wanted to go do computer graphics. So I saw the word computer. I forgot about the word science, and I said, all right, cool, this is the school to go to. And when I got there, I realized there was no programs for what I wanted. So there was an elective class for photography, for black and white film photography. I took that. And one of the instructors, he also taught a Photoshop class. And that was an elective as well. So between taking the black and white, studio, darkroom class and taking the Photoshop class, I realized there was something happening between those two classes that I really enjoy. And at a certain point, I took these elective classes to the point where I wasn't even getting credit for them anymore. None of the time I spent in the classroom was going towards my credit. And I remember I went to the school's office and said, listen, you don't have the major I want, but I found these classes that I really like. Can I make up my own major? And they said, nobody's ever asked us that before. Let me think about it. And then a day or two later, they said, yeah, sure, you can make up your own major. What do you want to call it? And we ended up calling it art studio. So I was able to sort of approach my college education the same way I approach my career, with like a creative aspect to it, being able to make up my own major and basically pick and choose the classes that I wanted. So when I took this black and white photography class, I had no idea that this was something that I could turn into a career. It just felt like, all right, this is a cool little toy. I take pictures around campus. I don't know what the steps are from going from being a student with a camera to becoming a professional worker for a newspaper or a magazine. And, I remember walking around campus with my darkroom equipment, and, I had to come up with a project. And I remember photographing smoking, and being able to, and at the time, it was marijuana. And is that okay?
It's okay.
All right.
We know you have not conducted any illegal activities, so you're telling a story about your photography.
Exactly. So back then, it was probably a little bit more taboo than it is now, right? But, I decided to make that my project, and while my friends are engaging, I was taking pictures. And my friends were like, well, what are you doing? I'm saying, I'm doing my homework. Click, 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 click. And then I would leave and go home while they're sitting there writing 20, 25-page papers. I took a few pictures, and I was like making that into my major. So, fast forward, I didn't really pick up my camera that much after college. I went away to grad school at Savannah College of Art and Design. And I was there for about 4 months before I decided that grad school wasn't for me. But while I was there, my apartment got broken into. Within a week and a half of me being in Savannah, my house got broken into. And they stole my camera and my lenses. And at that point, I just said, well, I'm not going to reinvest in this, equipment, because I wasn't really using it that much. I was getting into graphic design and motion graphics. So I just kind of chucked it up as a loss. And on my first camera, by the way, was a Nikon FM10. And that was the one I started out with. And I started out with Nikon and pretty much stayed with it just because I liked the way the name sounded. At the time when I was looking for cameras, I had no real basis of how to make a decision. It's really overwhelming when you're trying to pick out a piece of equipment and don't know what specs to choose. What's
a very personal choice. Yep.
So I like the name better than Canon, and those were the two major options at that time. And I like yellow more than I did red, right? So it was just like, all right, cool. This is how I'm making this choice. But I've kind of just stuck with Nikon since 1999. Now,
we appreciate that. We like yellow better too. I'm just saying.
So my camera gear got stolen, and I didn't pick up a camera again really for a few years, because I had already gotten into motion graphics and trying to start a motion graphics business back in like the early 2000s. One weekend when I decided to propose to my then girlfriend, one of my coworkers, he had brought in a Canon camera and let me hold it to take some pictures. So I brought it up that weekend to make the proposal and just hang out at my alma mater. And for that weekend, I had fell in love with taking pictures again. It was a digital camera, and just the ease of being able to shoot, and then look at the images was like, wow, this is much better than getting it processed and developed and waiting, to see them. So that kind of just, so it just sparked something in me again. Like I forgot how much I really enjoyed taking pictures. So once I got back home, I decided to, get my first digital camera, which was the Nikon D40. And I wanted to start off at the very, very basic, entry point, because, these cameras are getting expensive. And if I'm not a professional, it's hard for me to justify spending, X amount of dollars on a camera that's not actually bringing me in money. So I started with that D40, and I was going out taking pictures, going to a lot of family events, taking pictures there. And after about 2 years, I decided to make an upgrade. And I remember at that point, I spent about maybe 1,200, 1,300 on a new body and lens. And, these prices for me at the time were not cheap. And I used that camera for another 2-3 years. And then I jumped up again to spend maybe like 2,000 and change on the camera. And then I had to have a talk with myself and say like, hey, you're spending money on these cameras. They're not actually bringing you in money. I said, if I do this, I need to make sure that I'm taking this work a little bit more seriously than a hobby. And it wasn't necessarily to become a professional, but it was more to make sure that I was making work that was impactful.
Right.
Excuse me. So the conversation I had was, find a story, tell stories in your community that are important to you and share them. And if you do that, then the cost of this camera is justified.
I think that's a great lesson for everybody, because you always say, if you photograph the things you love, you bring your passion to it. But the way you just stated it was far better, and not just in the monetary value of it all and bringing back the money, but go into your community and, find the things that you love to shoot or the stories you want to tell. That's amazing. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, because, as a Black photographer, I hadn't really seen a lot of, images of Black folks taken by Black folks. And of course, you have Gordon Parks. That's like the legend, right? But I knew that there had to be more, right? There had to be more photographers out there. And I felt like to me, I was disappointed that it wasn't easily accessible. So at the time, my goal was to just share these photos. And if there was another Black kid who was interested in photography, looking for inspiration, I wanted to make sure that at some point they would find my name and find my work and be like, okay, there are more out there, right? So that was the conversation that I was having. And I remember one day I was just sharing photos on Facebook, and one of my friends reached out to me and said, hey, wait, before I talk about that, right? I was taking a class at International Center of Photography, and I remember I wanted to share some of my portfolio with an instructor, this French photographer named Frank Fournier, and he was a really cool dude. And we met up. I brought my work. I said, hey, Frank, I want to show you my work. He said, all right, cool. Just to let you know, I think that portfolios are bullshit. And I was like, whoa, well, what do you want? I don't know what you want me to say now, right? Because I have this work here. I'm excited to show it to him. And he said, well, anybody can take a great picture once, right? Or anybody can take a few great pictures and put it together in a collection and say, this is a portfolio. He said, but what I would suggest you do is find a project that means something to you and go out there and photograph that project only the way that you can, with your interest and your passion and your experience. Put that into that project. And then when you start to create enough projects, you'll be able to cherry pick the best images from those projects. And then that's where you start to build a solid portfolio. And I was like, okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense. But can I still show you my portfolio? And he said, all right, cool. So he looked at it. But about a week and a half later, my friend reaches out and she mentions that she saw some photos that I was posting on Facebook. And she said, whenever I want, I have an open invitation to come to her job and take pictures. I said, where do you work? She said, Dance Den of Harlem. I said, all right, that sounds cool. I wasn't really into dance. I'm not a dancer. I wasn't interested in photographing dance. But I asked her, I said, before I agreed to this, what's the demographic of the students there? And she said, young Black and brown dancers. I said, perfect. So I agreed, and I showed up on the day that we agreed on. And basically, it was like a performance happening for the family and friends. And for this being my first time going there, it felt like this had been a typical performance. Like they've done this type of show hundreds of times. They gave me like this 3-foot space in right dead center, right in between both sides of the family and friends, where they just wanted me to take pictures of the dancers performing. And I said, right here, this much space, 3 feet? They were like, yep, this space right here. I said, all right, cool. As soon as that person like left the room, I got up and I left the room and I started wandering and going places where I shouldn't have gone. But I think that's like in true photojournalism fashion, you know, try to get access to the places where you're not necessarily supposed to have access, but you know that's where all the magic is happening, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Access for a photographer, for a photojournalist, for a documentary photographer, access is key. You know, you
Sure.
could be technically good at using your camera, but some of the best photographers are able to make friends very quickly, get access, get that relationship with the person that they're photographing so that you're able to get the emotion, you're able to extract something from that,
Right.
that interaction with them, right? So that's sort of what I was able to do that first day. And I started taking pictures of all these moments happening backstage, downstairs, in the hallway, staircases, all of these different interactions. And I remember bringing going back that day and doing an edit and looking through these photos and being like, wow, there's something really interesting happening here. And I also had that conversation with Frank Fournier in my head about finding a project that means something to you. And although I wasn't really into dance, I was into the concept of what it took for these young people to become professional dancers. Like, how often do you see the work it takes for an entertainer to make it to the stage, right?
You mentioned it
Oh
before
yeah,
too, behind the
right.
scenes. That's
Yes,
what nobody really sees, and that's the story you're bringing to everybody that can't be backstage.
exactly, exactly. So, and I remember that first day when I showed up, there was an instructor. She was really strong, and she was really stern with the young people. And she was just asking them, like, is that the best you could do? Is that the best you can do? And these young people had to like really look within themselves and answer like if they put 100% out there while they were rehearsing and performing. And it's one of those questions where you have to confront yourself, right? You know if you gave 100% or not,
Sure.
right? And most times you're going to say, no, I didn't give 100%, even if it was 98%. And the tough love that this woman was instilling in these young people, to me, was like the deciding factor in me pursuing this project, because I feel like these young people, I don't know what any of their stories are at home. I don't know what life is like at home or in school, but I know like when they walk through these doors and they go to rehearse and prepare
Mm-hmm.
for these performances, that they're getting a level of tough love that is necessary for young Black and brown people in this world where the world is not always, you know, in our corner. So
Is
that was
is the
important for
first
me.
picture? Is the first picture that you're going to show us from that dance academy?
It is.
Why don't we shift over to the pictures now, and if we can
Yeah.
start talking about them, so that would be great. But what
Yeah,
a
for
great
sure.
backstory to your career and getting started. So thank you for sharing that.
No
But
problem.
let me let this open this program up. Let's go full screen. We'll get pushed aside. And I saw this picture in the group when you sent it to me, and just the impact, the attention, the tonality, the use of black and white over color here. Talk about this image. I assume this is part of the story you were just telling as well. And
Yes.
give us the background to the picture.
So this photo right here, this is one of the later photos. This is not when I first started the project. So after I started the project, they would invite me back to for different events that they were having at the school. And on this day, Misty Copeland, I think she's the first African-American principal ballet in the American ballet. She's a Black dancer. She was giving a guest workshop. And when these young people heard that Misty was in the building, they bolted wherever they were at. They left it. They left where they were at, and they ran over to the studio and crowded the door just to see Misty perform and give this workshop. And so what's happening is there are a select group of dancers actually participating in the workshop, and these young people are just at the door, just in awe, watching Misty, conduct this workshop. And it's important. This photo is important because Misty represents the future or the possibilities that are open to them if they continue to pursue this craft, this art form. And I just love like the different facial expressions, the different tonalities in skin tones, and just they're also different, similar, unique. It's just and they're just so innocent, And this photo was it just captured a really nice moment, from that school. And this photo has gone on and won an award, for, like an American Photography Award, last year or 2 years ago, I think. And it kind of sums up my experience working with this school.
When you get involved in something like this, and it's similar to some of the work that I do, so I always concern myself with relationships and the development of relationships and making sure that you're connecting with people. You've got young ladies here, you've got the camera. Do they at one point just you become invisible with the camera? What are you doing to sort of let them be them? How are you approaching it to let them be them and not be so focused on you taking the picture?
Well, the cool thing is that these dancers, performing ballet is very complex and intricate, and they need to be 100% dialed in to what they're doing. So there have been moments where I speak to the instructors when I go to the performances or the rehearsals, and I always tell them, let me know if I'm being too distracting to them. They say, do what you want, don't worry about them. They know that they're not supposed to be paying attention to anything else but the performance. So I basically invisibilize myself. I've been referred to as a ninja when it comes to photographing, because people that I photograph will, after I show them the images, they're like, I did not see you taking this image. And there might be an image where I'm right in their face. So one trick that I have is that I don't walk into a place with my camera, because I don't want it known like, hey, I'm the photographer, I'm here to do my job. Like, I don't walk in like that. I walk in and kind of assess the scene and the environment, the mood, the emotion that's happening. And then I go off into a corner, tuck my stuff away, and then I start to take out my gear, and I figure out which lens I want to use to start off with. And sometimes it might be a 70-200 if I want to keep my distance, or am I going with a 24-70 if I feel like I want to get up and close and personal right from the beginning. It all depends on what the mood is. And unless I'm taking the picture, my face is not behind the camera. So I usually have like a sling that goes to the side instead of that's like hanging in the middle. And then I could kind of like have my hand on the camera as I'm walking around so it doesn't swing around or bump into people or things. And I kind of angle it in a way that, based on, like, if I know I want to photograph somebody that's at a certain perspective, I angle it in a way where they don't see the camera. And then when it's time to take the picture, the sling allows me to like reach for the camera real quick. It has like a stop gap right here, and it stops right at where I want it to, and then take the picture. Over the years, I've gotten better at changing my settings as I walk from one room to the next. And it just becomes like second nature, like a muscle memory. And I kind of keep my settings as close to dialed in as possible, so that when it's time to take that picture, I take it and then I move back into the shadows until I find another picture that I want to take. So that kind of helps with me getting like an unobstructed, image where they're not really paying attention to me.
No, that's beautiful. And it's a great picture to start off with. And thank you for sharing. I love this picture. It's direct, it's colorful. Talk about this. Where are you? What's going on here?
This is a recent picture during one of the protests here in Brooklyn. you know, due to like everything that's happening in the country with police brutality in the Black communities. And this photo was, I was on assignment for Reuters to cover the protests. And, you know, with protests, you never know what to expect. You don't know if what the route that the folks are marching in. You don't know what the energy of the crowd is going to be, what the energy of the police are going to be. You really just have to be reactionary and keep your head on the swivel. So this photo happened as the protesters were turning a corner, and it was, you know, obviously when protesting, there's some traffic buildup and there's like a jam at a certain point, and this bus was stopped, and there was these young people on the bus just like looking out the window at all the protesters going by. And you know, a lot of protesters went by and they would see these young people and they'll put their fist up, and the fist is like for solidarity, for unity. And
Yep.
this young man responded to the people outside putting their fist up. And as soon as I saw that, you know, and saw him right next to the flag, you know, it just felt like something's about to happen. And then, you know, had my settings dialed in and I was ready to capture this image. You know.
It's beautifully done. I mean, again, right through the window, the reflections are all a part of it. The color from the American flag, and certainly the fist up has its impact. Was this 2470?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. I think I could just keep the 2470 on all day and not have to change it. Like that's my go-to. That's my baby.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And how have you been covering the protests from the beginning?
No, I haven't. The protests have been, I did want to cover some of the protests, but to cover it thoroughly would mean to be out there like several days a week. And it was not something that I'm able to commit to do thorough justice to it. You know, I have a 9-to-5 job, I have a family, I have other projects that I'm working on. And at a certain point, you know, it was putting too much on my plate to cover because, you know, it's very physical. It's very labor intensive to march with the protesters for, I don't know, 6 hours, 6 miles, 7 miles, and while working and filing at the same time. So it's labor intensive. And, you know, I don't think that I'm done covering them. I probably will go back out and continue to do some more coverage, just because it's such an important time in history to be out there. And since the protests are based on, you know, issues that are happening in the Black community, it's important for me as a Black photographer to be out there with my camera and my perspective. So I will be back out there, and you know, I do know that there's other ways to cover the protests that don't necessarily require being at a protest. Like there's changes happening, you know, in the middle of the protest, in the middle of the marches, and then there's also sub-stories that are developing from these protests as well. So with me and my focus in documentary, I'm looking for those sub-stories that develop from the protests.
Beautiful. Just a stunning image, and thank you for sharing that. What do we have going on here? I'm sure there's a big story here.
So as I was, you know, I've been photographing the Dance Theater of Harlem project, the ballet school, for a few years at this point, and I was thinking about what my next story would be. That was the first project that I ever did, the Dance Theater Harlem story. And, you know, I learned a lot from that project, and I learned that I didn't really have a narrative component to that project. It was just me going and taking like photos of things that were happening. And I didn't really understand like the edit process. I didn't understand the story arc process. Just like when you watch a movie, there's like a beginning, middle, and end. I didn't understand that, you know. So I was looking for a way to start a new project that had a little bit more focus. And as I was scrolling through my phone book one day, I saw a name of a friend that I made at I met him at a conference or a workshop, and I remember him telling me that he was a funeral director, you know. And I said, what exactly is a funeral director? And he's like, basically, you know, he has his own funeral home in East New York, Brooklyn, and he helps to prepare the bodies for funerals, and he is the person who conducts like the eulogies and things like that. So when I saw his name in my phone book, I said, oh wow, I remember what he told me he did for a living. Let me see if he'd be interested in you know, being part of a photo essay. And I gave him a call. I said, hey man, long time no hear from. Would you be interested in, you know, if I followed you around as you like conduct your day-to-day work? And he said, yeah, sure. He said, what are you doing Thursday at 9 a.m.? I said, I'm free. I was free. He said, all right, cool. I'll pick you up at 9 a.m. I said, all right, cool. 9 a.m. Thursday comes. I go downstairs. He's waiting outside in his minivan. And I jump in. I give him a pound. I say, hey, what's up, man? Good morning. He said, good morning. He said, you ready to go? I'm like, yeah. He said, all right, cool. I'm on my way to pick up my first client. So put my seatbelt in. We start driving. And then I look at him. I said, client? He's like, he was like, yeah. You know, I don't call them deceased or dead people. Like, they're clients, you know? And I was like, oh, okay. I said, well, I got my camera with me, so I'm ready to get started. And he was like, all right, cool. We're heading to the morgue. And just like that, you know, within 2 days of, you know, speaking to him, I was in the minivan headed to the morgue to start this project. And we get to the morgue, and as soon as we get out, I'm walking in with my camera and I start snapping away. And there's like a security guard there that tells me that I'm not able to photograph in the morgue for like security purposes. So, you know, put the camera away and tried to find other ways to document what was happening. And he grabs his client, he loads him into the vehicle, and we get back in the car, and we're on our way back to the funeral home. And the funny thing is, when the minivan was empty, when we were on our way to the morgue, the gurneys in the back, every time like we would get to a red light, the gurneys would slide, and the gurney would like hit our chairs. So you sort of get used to like red light, hear this sound, boom, and you get the bump, right? Every red light or stop sign. So I was used to it. I was desensitized. So on our way back to the funeral home with the client in the back, same thing. We get to red lights, and then, you know, I would hear the sound and something would bump our seat. But this time around, it just started, the bump was a little heavier. And after like the third or fourth red light, I would feel like this bump. And I'm just like, why is this bump so heavy? And I would turn around, and then I'd see the body there. And I was like, oh, smack, this is what I signed up for.
Yeah,
and
that's a hard reality at that point emotionally, I would think.
Yeah, and so the thing is, I have never really come face to face with death in my life, and I had no real issues or reservations, you know, taking on this project. And you know, there will be days on my free days whenever I will go to do some work on this project where I'm hanging out in the funeral home for like 6 hours, and I'm just like in the office with the owner, with the director and his employees. And the funny thing is, the same way you or I go to work, and you know, we have coffee and we bump into somebody in the kitchen. It's like, hey, how was your weekend? Did you catch the game? Well, how's your family? How's your kids? Blah, blah, blah. It's the same thing, right? Same thing that happens in this funeral home. Only difference is their job is to work with deceased, right? And if there was no funeral homes, then society would be really messy and unsanitary.
I can imagine. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So
No, it's
yeah,
great. I mean, it's a far different project from the dance project, big gap between, what you're
yeah,
trying to record here. But again, very interesting, backstory to this. I assume this is all part of the same story.
yeah, yeah. So this is like in the basement, and similarly to the dance story, it is focused on an aspect of Black community that I think is not really seen. And with dance, I wasn't focusing on the actual performances. I was focusing on the behind the scenes, like what does it take to make it to a professional, right? And I have maybe one photo in that dance project of someone dancing on stage with the big lights and everything, just for context, right? But same thing with this project. The goal is not to just photograph deceased. It's not to photograph, dead people. That's to me, that could be a little bit exploitative, and it could be sensationalized, and that's not what it's about. I think I didn't want to disrespect the person who had passed and disrespect the family who was living. Like that's not what this project was about. But it was basically to cover the behind the scenes of what it takes to run a funeral home. And, for a lot of Black folks, funeral homes needed to be created in Black communities so that the deceased can get some, in regards, more respect and dignity in passing than they received while living. And there were a lot of communities that would not take Black bodies. A lot of funeral homes would not, service Black families. So these funeral homes were important to create in Black communities so that we could send off our loved ones in a respectable way. So there's no images of the deceased. It's all more about like the aspects of what it takes to run a funeral home.
Sure. When you got into this kind of documentary photography, is this before you went to the Eddie Adams workshop or
Yes,
after? And how big
yes.
did that workshop play in your? I mean, you got the best of the best, the creme de la creme of editors and photographers, and people at that workshop to learn from. How much of a sponge were you there, and does that play into the work the way you see it now?
Well, yeah, absolutely, man. When I applied to Eddie Adams, I think at the time it was a 20 photo submission. So I used 12 photos from the Dance That of Harlem project and 8 photos from this series. And it was recommended to submit 2 bodies of work because it shows that I'm not just focused on one project, that I could think about 2 separate projects. And I think the fact that these 2 projects are completely polar opposite of each other shows that I have some sort of flexibility in storytelling. So these two projects got me in, and it was the second time that I applied that I got in. And going to Eddie Adams' workshop was definitely a game changer. It opened up so many doors for me because, like my photo world instantly shrunk. At one point, I mean, it actually got larger. It didn't shrink. It was, but it was it's one of those things where the world itself kind of like shrunk because I went from being this, wide-eyed kid trying to figure out how to become a professional and get in contact with certain people, but not knowing where to start. And then all of a sudden going to this workshop and then having access to all of these Pulitzer Prize winning photographers, editors from all over the place, and then having my network like increase almost overnight. And, I think I think a lot of students would tell you when they go through the Eddie Adams workshop that they bombed on their assignment. They bombed on the project that you have to shoot for the weekend. And I felt really down on myself because I felt like I have this editor and this team leader that is looking at my work that I shot for this weekend. And if I don't impress them, then there's a direct connection that I was not able to make, And it just so happened that, I'm from New York. I'm from Brooklyn. And what they say about New York is having like this certain type of hustle and, this work ethic. And this sort of like this ingrained sense of urgency to make things happen and to connect with people in a very timely manner. That was evident there. Like we have the 11 p.m. club at Eddie Adams where you're supposed to like, you're scheduled to sit down with at least 3 people to review your portfolio.
Photo critiques, I remember them well.
Yeah.
It's where you lose a lot of sleep, but it's worth it.
Exactly. And I remember I had some other fellow students who were going to sleep and calling it a night before editors, before the reviewers. And in my mind, I was like, are you insane? Like this editor, this famous photographer or publisher or whoever is willing to stay up until 6 a.m. looking at work, and you're going to go to sleep before them? I was like, oh, nah, I'm going to speak to whoever I need to speak to. And it doesn't matter if I was scheduled to speak to them or not. Like if they're hanging around, if they're sitting at a table by themselves, I'm sitting down next to them and I'm showing them my work. And that sort of was my approach. You know, I would speak to as many people as possible. I would, if there was a 5-minute gap, like if a student was late to their appointment with their reviewer, then I was filling that gap for 5 minutes until it was time for them to kick me off the table. And that's sort of how I've been throughout my life. Like I remember I got my first internship at ABC. I was just calling the person every single day until the person said, all right, listen, stop calling me, come in on Monday and we'll figure out something for you to do. Like that's sort of how I operate, right? So that's what I did during the portfolio review. And, you know, so what was interesting is a few months before that, I applied to become a Fulbright fellow, and I applied to the Eddie Adams workshop at the same time. And I remember when I applied, I said, in my head, I said, I'm going to get both of these things. And I scheduled my departure to Ghana. My Fulbright fellowship was in Ghana. I scheduled the departure a week after the Eddie Adams workshop wrapped, because in my mind, I said, I'm getting into the workshop and I'm getting this Fulbright fellowship, and I don't want them to conflict. Right. And it happened just like that, you know? And so that was sort of me envisioning, you know, the path that I wanted my career to take. So right after Eddie Adams wrapped up, I basically had to run back home, continue packing to get ready for this next, you know, life-changing journey, which was to move to Ghana for 8 months.
Oh, beautiful.
So,
let's keep rolling on. I love this portrait. I love the color. I love, you know, just the look, the vibe, everything. Where are you here? What's going on here?
I'm in Ghana. I'm in Accra. Accra is the capital of Ghana. And this is so my fellowship to Ghana was based on, I wanted to show the connection between hip hop in the US and traditional West African music, and show that there's a connection. And through the slave trade, you know, the Africans who were taken from West Africa and brought to like South America and the US and to Europe, in that transition, there was a transformation of the music that was happening in the culture. And I wanted to paint this picture of how the US is the biggest producer of hip hop, and you have Ghanaian hip hop artists looking to the West for what's popular and what's trending, when essentially hip hop came from West Africa, right? So I wanted to paint this picture through documentary photos, and it was just it was a very challenging project to do. And at the time, this was a week after Eddie Adams, so I had not had much contact with editors on how to put a story together. I had no context on who to reach out to if I had a roadblock in the story, and what different avenues I can travel down to help flesh the story out. So what ended up happening is I turned this into a portrait project, and I was meeting a lot of musicians all over, and word started to get around that there was like this, you know, African-American photographer interested in taking pictures of musicians. So at a certain point, I was sort of like known as that photographer. So I would just hang out with a bunch of musicians and go to different performances, take like concert photography, things like that. And this artist right here, his name is Manifest, and he's one of the biggest hip hop artists in Ghana. And I remember I showed up to maybe 2 performances where he was, on stage. And at one point, he made eye contact with me and gave me like a nod. And then after the show was over, he approaches me and said, "Hey, I keep seeing you everywhere I'm at. Like, what's your story? What's going on?" And I told him, and he said, "All right, cool." I said, "Well, would you mind if I knew once I got in with him, like I would start to get access to other people and start to get some real, like some good images." And, I said, "Well, how you feel about me, like following you around and telling your story?" He was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So this photo was taken at the Ghana the Ghana Music Awards, right? And he called me up and said, "Hey, I got nominated for 4 awards. How would you like to join me at the award show?" I was like, "Yes, let's do it." So he picked me up. We head to the hotel where he gets changed, and we head over to the venue where the music awards are happening. And I'm just by his side every step of the way. He's one of the biggest artists, nominated for 4 awards. I'm backstage with him. He's performing that night. And I'm just like taking as many photos as I can, trying to tell his story. And this photo happened backstage a few minutes before he went on to perform. And every artist goes through their own sort of, routine of what they need to do to get in the zone in order to perform. And he's like going over his lyrics. He's getting himself zoned out. And he just pauses for a moment, and I captured his picture. And the cool thing about this picture, and actually about all of the projects that I've shared so far, is that my personal projects, I never ever talk money. I never talk money with the people who I approach to do these projects with. I always offer my photos in return for the time that they open up to me. So whether it's the Blackbirds project, the dance ballet project, where I at a certain point I had a gallery showing at ICP, and I paid to have all of the pictures printed and framed and hung. I called my contact and told her that once the show was done, that they can go pick up the framed images, and I suggested that they auction them off so that they would make money from it, to bring money back into the school. So they've auctioned off my work for like thousands of dollars, and I never asked them for a dime. Same thing with the funeral home project. Like, I offer the photos for free. Same thing with all of these artists in Ghana. They're giving me their time. I'm taking these pictures. I give it to them, and they can use for their marketing. And at a certain point, I remember being in a car driving on a highway in Ghana, and I would look up and I see this photo on like a huge billboard in Ghana, right? And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And then I would see another billboard, a different image with the same image. So this image right here was like, for a while, just like all over Ghana on billboards, on social media, on a lot of different platforms. So to me, that was a good feeling that this photo had that sort of resonance, and it was able to travel as far as it did, especially it being a personal project.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Is this in the same place, same subject?
Yep. This is Ghana as well. So what I did was I connected with a hip hop organization in Ghana called Yo-Yo Tins, and they basically knew a lot of the upcoming artists. So, I worked with them to help find artists. Then I would take pictures and give them the photos so that they could use for their marketing. And, so I just set up a lot of photo shoots with these artists just to get these like environmental portraits. And what I didn't realize at the time was that I really enjoyed taking or making, environmental portraits because, I wouldn't have an agenda. I would just meet up with them at the agreed time and we would walk around and they would always ask me like, what do you have in mind? What do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know yet. But when I find it, I'll let you know. And I'll just be able to have conversations with them about life, about music, about culture or whatever, and make friendships. And then when we see something interesting, then we'll make the photo happen that way. So it's sort of like wandering aimlessly until you find something, and then you realize this is the purpose of why we were wandering. If that makes sense.
It makes sense. Absolutely. It's beautiful. We're going to keep rolling through because you have a few more pictures here. Very interesting photo. What's happening here? Where are you?
So we are at this venue where I forgot what event used to happen here in Ghana. This is in Ghana as well. And it was the event that used to happen in this venue years ago, and now it's sort of like dilapidated and they don't use it anymore. And I met up with this artist. She's a Nigerian hip hop artist who's going to school in Ghana. Her name is Tinuke. And we met up at this venue, and inside, while we started to take pictures, I guess one of like the groundskeepers or manager of the venue saw us taking pictures, came up to us and said, "You can't be here." But then kind of like said, "If you want to be here, you have to pay me X amount of money," right? So we were like, F that, man, we're out of here, right? So we left and we walked around the perimeter, and then we saw this gate that had been like sort of pried open, and it was leading right back into the same venue. So we just went right back in and, started wandering around that way. And we had a feeling that nobody was going to end up on this section to kick us out because it was just sort of, it was further away from where that first person was. And I don't think he was wandering around trying to like kick people off the property. He just wanted to make some quick money. So we took a series of photos in this location. And this one right here just sort of spoke to me the most. It's sort of like she's halfway in, halfway out, and it's representative of how we actually got into this space, and yeah, I didn't have to like direct them. Most of these portraits, I don't direct people. She just kind of did her own thing. And, to me, it's something about the way she's standing and, just sort of spoke to me.
Yeah, it shows strength. It's very serious. Definitely picked up within that moment of what you just described. But a beautiful, beautiful portrait, beautifully done. I saw this, and I got to hear the backstory on this. What a beautiful, energetic image. You got a little bit of dance here, excitement, energy. Who is this, and what did you do to make this picture?
This again was in Ghana, and since I was covering music, like artists, like dance and music in Ghana it's sort of inseparable. You don't have dance without music, and there's no music without dance. They go hand in hand. So, I just sort of always kept finding myself photographing dance, and, I was able to tap into my experience photographing the dance theater of Harlem while I was out there, because everywhere you go, even with all the hip hop musicians, there was still an element of dance involved. So I was working with I might get the name wrong because it's been a few years, but the National Theater of Ghana, and they have performances year round. And there was a performance happening for Yemiya. Yemiya is the goddess of oceans. And there was a group of women who were dancing, and they called me up to photograph some photos for their marketing to promote this show that was coming up. So there were several women in this scene, but this photo to me just, jumped out at me, no pun intended, because of how clean it is, you know, and how high she is. But I'm actually on the floor, laying down, taking this photo, just to give it some added perspective and added height. And what was cool about the some of the other photos in this series, I wish I could have shared, but you know, you asked me to cull it down to 6 to 8. So
I know. Don't blame me for that. That's Brian, the producer's fault. No, we just, of course, we're limited time. But this is good because we're going to ask people to go look at your work. And I would assume, you know, Idris Solomon is your Instagram handle. But yeah, so again, I'm sorry we had you cull it down, but this is a beautiful image to set people, you know, to a place to get excited to go look at the rest of your work. But I love it. Like you said, sometimes the simpler the better. You getting down creates that more magnificent, powerful image to give her even more height. And it's just so beautifully done. Now, how long were you in Ghana?
I was in Ghana for 8 months.
Yeah, that's a great stretch. And it seems like the hip hop and the musicians kind of led you to each of these different things that you were photographing. So that networking worked out really, really well. Really beautiful. I know this is your last image and very, very powerful. When I saw this in the series, I of course, Black Lives Matter. I would think you talked about the protests before. So this is part of that protest story in your coverage. Really, really strong, but the statement is just so impactful. Talk about where you shot this and what's the backstory here.
Yeah, this was at the tail end of one of the protests I photographed, and you know, the protesters ended up in a park in Bed-Stuy, and there was some announcements being made about next steps, and you know, people were just gathered, you know, just remembering why we were all gathered there and how important it is to be unified and to, you know, have justice. And, you know, there's a lot of quiet moments. And I've found that my style of photography focuses a lot on the quiet moments. Like, in order for me to do a lot of behind the scenes work, I have to look for things that are not always in your face, you know. So whether it's dancing or music or protest, finding moments where people actually are in their true element at that moment and capturing that as genuinely as possible. And I think sometimes we can tell when people are aware of the camera, and those photos just, I don't like them when I take them, because I know it and I see it. Even if the rest of the world doesn't see it, like, I know that this person might have been super aware of the camera and might be performative. And so towards the photos where people are just in their zone and I'm not even a thought to them. And, you know, this brother with his fist up, with the flag upside down, and, you know, it just, you know, it resonated with me because, you know, it shows that, you know, people are fed up. People are looking for changes to happen. And the changes that folks want to happen are not to make things worse, is to make humanity better, you know?
Absolutely.
So.
No, and again, it's a conversation we need to keep having. And through your images, there's certainly a great conversation to be had. So, again, another powerful image, and I will apologize one last time as I bring you back full screen, that you had to cull your images down, but now we've shared Idris Solomon's work with the world, and maybe a bunch of people that have not seen your work before will follow you on your website and on your Instagram page. Are there any other social places you're hanging out? You mentioned Facebook before.
Instagram, really. Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, and to that point, you know, I've created like a podcast that helps to get more exposure to Black photographers and videographers, you know, and that podcast is the Black Shutter podcast. And I remember, like, going back to something I mentioned earlier in the conversation, was not having like easy access to Black photographers and their work, and looking for that kind of inspiration. So I created Black Shutter podcast as a way to create a hub of, stories and, dialogue with photographers, Black photographers, about their experiences, about their work, about their inspirations and frustrations, and all of these different things that any up and coming photographer can vibe on, but it's specifically Black photographers, Black and brown photographers, because there's certain types of challenges that we might face that another photographer may not. But I think that hearing a photographer's journey, regardless of your background, is always interesting, because there's just something that is that happens across the board when trying to get into photography.
Beautiful. And those of you tuning in, make sure you check that out. If they Googled Idris Solomon Black Shutter podcast, they'll find it. And that's amazing. I can't wait to go listen to some of those segments myself. So, Idris, thank you for giving us your time. This has been a great hour, great stories, and I love your journey, and I hope we have many more conversations to come. But I know how tough it is to cull down the work, but at least this is a launch pad for people to see what you do. And as you said earlier, you're on the flip side of what you typically do in the way of being the interviewer, so you're the interviewee, and I appreciate that. I know everyone at Nikon does as well. So thank you for your time. All right. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Those of you tuning into the Creators Hour, again, if you missed any part of this, we will be rerunning it time and time again. Check out nikonusa.com/the Creators Hour for all kinds of photographic tips, inspiration on how to take pictures, more interviews with ambassadors and really epic photographers, great stories that they tell about the work they've done and the backstories to all the images. Check out Idris Solomon on his Instagram page and his podcast, and I promise you will be inspired. So everybody get out there, take great pictures, share them with us, share them with the world, be inspired to tell stories, and everybody out there be safe. So for Nikon, I am Mike Corrado. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.